Hey everyone, there's a new modulator in Sensory Percussion 2.3. I got to help make this one, so I'm pretty stoked on it. It's called Random Step. There are two modes. The first one is quite simple. Every time it receives a hit message, it generates a random value. If you play really fast, it's going to be kind of frenetic, whereas if you play slow, it's just going to jump whenever you play. The synchronization, I think, makes random feel a lot more cohesive. So you could use that as a modulation source for anything. Let's get into some examples that feel a little more intentional. So one of my favorite tricks in sensory percussion since V1 days was to do something like this, where you use velocity to modulate pitch. And then you can play stuff like this. This is really great, and I still love doing this. However, something I've noticed over the years, it kind of always feels similar to me no matter what I'm playing, at least with how I play. Using random step to control pitch, we're doing a similar trick, except this time we're using velocity to modulate the maximum possible random value. With an inverted range, that means when I play hard, I only get 0, which is my lowest note, and that's something that feels really good to me. And when I play with a medium dynamic, we introduce more possible random values, but we're still only getting like halfway there. And when I play really soft, then we get the whole range. So with this mechanism, we can get something that feels like this. I'm a fan. Alright, this example is we just have a legato string sample here. Pretty chill. This random step modulator is controlling the fine tune parameter on the sample. What I'm going for is kind of like a swarm, like super voice effect where we have lots of active voices that are slightly out of tune from each other. And what I wanted to happen was that width of possible tunings increases when I play harder, but when I play soft, I want it to be more like come more into tune. We're mapping velocity to the max and the min in this case. With softer velocities, we're returning to the center, 0 to 1, so 0.5. And by doing the same thing, that's how we have our possible range of pitches come back to center, but expand as we play harder. This example is using this modulation for a more mechanical purpose. I have a sequence of piano notes in an ascending scale. The sequencer is in manual mode, so we have to hit this button to go to the next step, and that's what I have this random step modulator mapped to. And the interesting opportunity here is that when mapping to a button and using the control type of target, we have a threshold value we have to surpass in order for the button to be pressed. With a random step module without mappings, that means that I just have a chance of advancing to the next step, which is pretty cool, if the value is above 0.25. That's already pretty cool, but to add some human influence to it, I'm again mapping to the min and max ranges to influence the likelihood of that modulation value going past 0.25. When I play soft, the maximum is below 0.25, so there's no chance of advancing to the next step. But as I play harder, there's more of a chance. And what I wanted to happen in this example is that when I play really hard, I know for sure I'm going to advance to the next step. So I made an assignment on the min as well, where it basically just flips to 0.25, so for sure we're going to advance every time. Here we're using random step to modulate the start time on this sample. Here's what the full sample sounds like.
10 million chickens and wedges.
And with modulation, every time we're just picking a random part to start at. It might seem kind of chaotic, but I think it's actually quite effective at adding interest to something. So let's just get rid of it for a second. And here's some drums that I have across the kit. It's a cool sounding kit, but it doesn't have a lot of dimension to it. Let's put in the 10 million chicken sandwiches and see if that helps. If that's too wild for you, let's do the same exact thing, but in a more calculated way. This sample has some silence beforehand, and we're using random step again to modulate the start time. This time we're going to use velocity to control the possible minimum, and as we play harder, we go towards the maximum, so the output has to be the max. I set the range of this assignment to be pretty much exactly the transient here. So as we play softer, we introduce the possibility of a delay before we hear the sound. And I think this is a really nice way to create a groove, to add some latency to certain elements. Okay, let's take a look at the steps side of random step. This is the other mode, but it is extremely powerful. To illustrate as clearly as possible what it does, I have it mapped to the transpose parameter here. The range is exactly 1 octave, 0 to plus 12. What it does is it increments the output value at the exact number of steps that you put in here to get from 0 to 1. When the number of steps is 12, that matches up perfectly with the range of 0 to 12, so we get perfect half steps. If I put in 24 steps, then we get a nice quarter tone scale. Or maybe you just want to do full tone. You also don't have to do integers. What's cool about doing something that doesn't divide super well is you can use this remainder parameter. This one toggles whether the remainder, once it reaches its maximum, is ignored, or if it's carried over. When it's carried over, you get a really amazing effect. If you can let the tuning here not bother you too much, what's amazing is that we have multiple arpeggios, all from this one relatively simple modulation source. Putting that in a slightly more palatable music example, we're going to bring in pitch and scale. We just have one sample again, but because we have a decimal number of steps and we're utilizing the remainder to permutate through phases, if you will, we end up with getting a whole chord progression out of one modulator and one sample. One cool benefit of using this technique with pitch and scale is that pitch and scale is, literally going to quantize those pitch outputs. So even though we're getting probably some crazy stuff with this decimal and everything, it's going to make it snap to the closest transposition that we have available here. And that means that we get some nice repetition, but still like a long form change. Stepping away from pitch, here's an example where we're using these stepped values to modulate the cutoff on a bandpass filter. I have an irregular step size, and we're utilizing the remainder. And I have 4 different pitches here. These do not all have to be in separate layers, but I thought it would be helpful for being able to see everything all at once. Each one of these voices has a different transposition to create a chord. Each voice has a different step size, that's all of which are irregular, so they're going to kind of evolve over time, and they're all controlling the cutoff on each voice. Each time the voices are kind of like weighted differently, and it feels a lot more complex than it is. This is a sample of like a really slow arpeggio. And we're using a step size that is approximately each note at one at a time. But obviously it's a bit off. But, it's kind of fuzzy math. It's close enough. And with that, discrepancy, it gives us some interesting variation to the sound where we're cutting off transients or maybe they're coming in slightly late. But the important thing is that it feels different over time. And to wrap it up, let's use the same trick, but way less intentionally. This is a stem of the vocals from a 100 gex song. We're using a very obscure step size. And what I like about this is that it's going to kind of jump through the song, but when it permutates, the permutation is not going to be that far off from where it was when it was in that general area. And this might be a stretch, but I feel like it sort of gives you a sense of the whole composition, or at least it feels familiar. I don't know.